We're there eventually. I'm going to put this up so you can see what's going on. How's that? The chat is here. I am going to refresh this to make sure I've got the chat. And why is it gone full screen? Good, that's fine. Everyone's here. Top chat. No, I want live chat. There we go, live chat. To everyone who's in the chat, hello. Hello. Wait a minute. Let's get our little faces up. Let's do this now. There we are. Well, hello everyone. Hello. It's
Hello,
it's 1 minute past. It's 1 minute past 7, which means that we're fashionably late for tonight's Rail Natter. As ever, how's the sound? Tell me about the sound, everyone. Is it okay? People hear me. What's the sound balance? Alex, how's the weather in Edinburgh just now?
It's absolutely glorious in Edinburgh this evening. 23 degrees, no wind. Evening drinks ahoy in Leith. Plenty of people out and about, obviously maintaining the correct distance, of course.
Of course,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's lovely.
Beautifully.
Good. People, so what's the sound balance, everyone? Let me know. Alex is coming through nice and clearly. Both of us apologise for the fan on his poor laptop. Yeah, everyone hears the fan. You're going to have to cope with the fan. Just, no pressure, Alex, but you've currently got, editors of substantial railway publications and representatives from the Netherlands and all sorts, lots and lots of people watching right now, watching your postage stamp-sized face. Right. I always get such a nice feeling at the start of a Rail Natter because I go into the chat and before I've even started the stream, for 5 minutes, people are already nattering and saying hello to each other, which is really nice. I just noticed there's a bit, let's ignore the fact I've got a fly in me water. It's really hot and I got heat stroke, so I'm drinking water. Let's tell you what, let's do this. Let's go. We're side to side. You can see Alex's face properly. Hello, everyone. I'm drinking water. I got heat stroke a couple of days ago, yeah. I basically collapsed in the middle of a call. Cheers.
Hopefully it's too warm today then. Hopefully you don't collapse today.
Well, if I collapse during the feed, it'll be broadly similar to the kind of the elevated chaos that normally happens. Okay, as a top tip that I learned from the chat last time, if you've got a question you want me to spot, then at me into the comment, because it helps me to sort of spot them from general good stuff in the chat. I love the fact that the live chat is just people saying hello to each other and having general conversations, but if you want to ask a question, then at me into it, because it comes up red and it's really obvious for me to scroll up and find it. That's Gareth's top Rail Natter tip. Anyway, what time? 1903. Alex, let's kick off and then we can do some introductions. Let's just kick off. All I'm going to say is people are enjoying the fan a lot. They think it's my PC though, because they've seen pictures of the wires hanging out of my PC, so they think it's mine. So we'll pretend it's my PC and not your poor laptop. Right. Anyway, without further ado, let's kick off tonight's Rail Natter. As the 225 fades out, I'm very pleased to say tonight's guest for Rail Natter is my very good friend and all-round awful human being, Alex Priestley. Here he is. No, he's lovely, and he's here to talk to us about... Yeah, that's my power intro. No one else has had an introduction like that. I'm nice to everyone else, but yeah, not so tonight. No, Alex is here to talk about weather and railways. Hi, Alex.
Yes.
Introduce yourself in your own words. Hello.
Own words. Well, as you've put, I'm a snow nerd.
Yeah.
I studied weather and snow at Edinburgh University, along with you studying engineering at Edinburgh University. That's where we started our escapade, isn't it? And
Yeah.
from there, I went on to work for the Met Office as a weather forecaster for a few years in a few different places. But most of the time was spent in the northeast of Scotland, which I know is a place dear to your heart, Gareth. And so I was in Aberdeen for several years. And then a few years ago, 2017, I stopped being a weather forecaster, and I've come back to Edinburgh to study snow as a PhD student in the School of Geosciences at Edinburgh University. So, gone back to snow. Started with snow at university with you, and we've gone back to snow with a bit of weather forecasting in between. And I like going on trains. But
Yeah, you do. You're like definitely. Yeah, you wouldn't say you're a full blown like weirdo like me, perhaps, but
I'm not a weirdo like
he is.
you. No,
He is a little bit. He is a little bit. Yeah, well, it's funny that so the snow PhD is a funny one. I mean, time is always. Let's forget time. It's fine. So the snow PhD is weird because we've known, for various reasons, we've known all the people who've done your essentially. It's not your PhD, but they've like the role that you're kind of in, that picking up the mantle of the snow PhD for like several generations. You know, Laura and Mike.
The last two PhD students before me, just coincidentally, are also quite good friends. So it's So I mean, they've told me the sort of full uncut version of how my supervisor is, and obviously that hasn't put me off. So
yeah, well, exactly. It's clearly
survived.
So the question is, who is being warmed up to pick up that PhD after you? Is that? I mean, obviously, don't say anything that can't be said. This is a public forum, but like, it's interesting to know if has that chain been broken.
Do I have any friends who are wanting to do?
That's it. Any brass instrument players who you want to bring in?
Probably brass instrument players. I'll have a think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Get them lined up. Oh, my sound is clipping slightly. Right. Okay, I'll turn it down a little bit. Is that any better, everyone? Check if that's the sound. I know it might be clipping a bit. Thanks for atting me. What's the lowest temp? Oh, here we go. We've already got questions. People are asking questions that you will have no hope of answering. What is the lowest temperature a points heater can handle? They go down to 40 degrees, I think, but the ones in the UK, I think, probably would pack in before then. Yeah, there we are. That's people are saying my sound. Is that sound better? People. Oh, a fellow geoscience adjacent obscure PhD greetings from John Christoph. Well, there you go.
Nice.
There you go. You see that it takes all sorts, RailNat. It really does take all sorts. Right. Let's press on. So let's get back to the slides at hand. So there we are. I'm sure everyone recognises Dawlish getting smashed to bits there. The news. We're going to do the news first. This is the first Class 90 that was in operation, and you can see here it's hauling passenger stock. And the reason I put this picture up is because they don't do that anymore. As of earlier, I don't know whether it was earlier this week or Monday or whatever, but or maybe it's soon. I think it was but certainly anyway today. I think that's it. They're gone for the first time since when railways started in the Anglia region. They don't have any locomotives hauling passenger stock, and indeed these Class 90s are now just on freight duties, which is a bit sad, really. The end of the British Rail AC locomotive era. So that next, talking of things coming to the end of their eras, Mark III coaches are now being smashed to bits at scale, which in my personal opinion is probably a good thing, because they're old and have slam doors, and they're which is Victorian, frankly. But you know, they're popular for lots of reasons. They rode pretty well, and they've had a good innings. They've done wonderfully, but they're now being ripped to shreds. So adieu. Right. Anyway. Isn't Grand Central getting 90s soon? Yeah, they might re-enter service, that's true. But for now, the 90s are pausing. Anyway, right. What else in the news? Yes, this is a plug because I'm the Section Secretary of the York Permanent Way Institution. The Permanent Way Institute has been putting quite a lot of good seminar videos on YouTube recently. So if you really are a massive nerd, to the point where you are watching RailNatters, so you've passed, then you might be interested to go over to the YouTube feed and give them a watch. Anyway, enough of that. That was the news. Let's talk about a Class 66 in a bin bag. Yeah. So, Alex, I don't know if you've got anything to say on the news. It wasn't very exciting.
That was an unfortunate incident, wasn't it? So that was June 2012, just above Loch Treig, so a West Highland line, north of Culross Station, south of Tulloch Station. And that Class 66 hauling, I believe, freight for the aluminium works in Fort William hit a landslip that was across the line and derailed, then went down a very steep embankment.
Yeah, it ran off. It was the driver was fine, to the point where he took a load of really good pictures on his phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So this was. So we're going to talk about landslips a little more, but this just goes to show that they happen all over the place, but certain places are more prone for obvious reasons, and that's gravity. So the steeper a slope is, the more likely you are to get a landslip, obviously. So anyone who's looked at the map or been along that railway line or climb those hills nearby will know that it's a very steep slope down from Stobbercurry Screedon right down to the Loch, about 800 metres below or something. So, so luckily this didn't end up any worse than it was. I mean, it was an absolute mare to get the thing back, wasn't it, Gareth?
I was just thinking, the reason this is funny is because we went past quite a few times on our way to various escapades.
A week or so later, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they put it in a placky bag by the time we went past?
I'm not sure. I think they might have put it in a plastic bag.
Yeah. So what was particularly funny?
Yeah, got the press trying to take a photo out of the window of the train, unlike Alistair on Flickr.
Yeah. Thanks, Alistair on Flickr, for having the prescience to sneak a picture out of the window of a Class 66 in a bin bag. So I mean, the trouble with throwing 100-ton locomotives off the side of a cliff is that actually it's quite hard to get them back and quite expensive. And even though they decided not to recover it intact, they still had to take all the trees out. All the nice trees you can see there on the kind of the far side, the left-hand side here, had to get blitzed so they could build a haul road just to take the big bits they sawed it into away. So they chopped it up. There's some funny photos you can find on the Googles of just the cab empty, sat in a yard somewhere that someone's probably eBaying as we speak. Landslips, but also us going off on railway escapades into the Highlands.
I believe we were with our bicycles that time. I think we were off to Ardnamurchan, perhaps.
Oh, was it for one of those? Oh, yeah, quite possibly.
I think it might. Yeah, I think it might have been.
Yeah. Oh, anyway. No. So
a couple of weeks where I started full-time employment at the Met Office.
Oh, that's nice. Anyway, so there you go, a 66. So the point of this slide, apart from being a way to introduce the sort of nonsense we get up to, is to sort of be like, yes, railways and weather can come into can compete with each other. In this instance, the train was derailed by a landslip, and invariably landslips are triggered by weather events. Weather events aren't necessarily the root cause, but they're often the trigger for landslides, and we're going to touch on that, I think, in a bit. Anyway, right, next slide. What are we up to? So, okay. We're going to talk about flooding. Flooding.
Well, flooding is not new, obviously, and in my book about rail disasters and weather that I have open here.
Show us the book, Alex.
It's great. Can
you see
that?
Yeah, it's an absolute corker by a PGJ Ransom or something?
PJG Ransom.
Forgive me.
So there's a lot of mention of washouts sort of from the early days of railways, from the mid-1840s and 1850s, but actually the first sort of proper written records of railways being submerged by flooding from swollen rivers was actually as late as 1875.
Oh, really?
Because there was plenty of railway action going on before then, of course. That happened in Burton-on-Trent and Nottingham on the River Trent.
It's interesting that it hadn't happened up to that. Yeah. Is there any particular meteorological reason for that?
There's definitely no meteorological reason for it. What could have been the case is that the railways weren't that widespread by then. I mean, they were becoming much more widespread, of course, but I think in 1850 there probably weren't anything like as many railways as there were.
The explosion happened in kind of the 50s and 60s, yeah.
But also, it says here that the engineers perhaps took to account the received wisdom of the locals and built and surveyed and built the embankments where they were needed more than they might otherwise have done. So they perhaps, but
PGJ or JG Ransom.
PGJG Ransom's thoughts. That's thrown up. Anyway, so
right.
So 1975 onwards, many floods.
And we picked out we picked out a couple. So if there's a picture of flooding. Points for anyone who realises the fan's getting worse apparently. Points for, I tell you what, I might be able to fix that if I do this and then this. It seemed to. Your poor laptop's desperately struggling. It's fine.
The fan's just been the same all the way, for me at least.
Yeah, I think the audio's getting upset. Anyway, so long as it's not horrendous, everyone seems to be reasonably happy. No one's screaming and shouting and saying it's a disaster. Anyway, right. The bad thing in this situation is that not only have you got a live third rail there, you've also got a live puddle at 750 volts DC. So not the best. Right, we're going to move on. Okay, yeah. So pictures of floods. These are recent, aren't they? So
Yeah, I mean, you procured these images, didn't you? But I think they're almost all from this February, so February
yeah,
2020, which was the wettest February on record. And obviously, when you get the wettest month on record, you get a lot of flooding, and particularly badly affected, I think, were places like Hebden Bridge and the Calder Valley and places like that. But I think there was a lot of quite widespread flooding elsewhere too. I was actually out of the country for the whole of February, so I was kind of disassociated from getting rained on every single day, which is what normally causes me to remember weather events, is being out and experiencing them.
yeah.
Actually, I was in France for a month doing snow nerdery, so that was lucky, and the weather was lovely there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, February 2020, one of the wettest, well, the wettest February on record.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, that's in itself pretty interesting and serious weather change.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So we got people pointing out. Yeah, you're right. It's one of those. I can't actually see which one it is, but yeah, it's definitely West Yorkshire Passenger Transport Executive in the kind of the blurry mobile phone picture that actually Network Rail shared that one, so it must have been taken by one of their staff. I think that's right. You've got the nice green one. I'm not sure exactly where that is, but it's a good picture of an absolutely rather substantially submerged bit of railway. The one in the bottom corner there is the Conwy Valley line, and you can see the ballast just been completely wiped out there, down to the geosynthetic at the bottom. So the nice material that we pile our ballast on, and then we've got a nice electrified line full of sog in the other picture. I think I might be wrong. I think that is on the west coast, but I might be. Someone else will correct me there. I think that might be the west coast main line though, north of Colton or somewhere. Anyway, yes. So everyone's recognising the mess that the poor Conwy Valley endured. It's had 2 major closures as a result of massive flooding. So we've got a couple of questions have come in already. Roaming Adocrat asks why you haven't simply adjusted the weather so that it's cooler today and the fan doesn't have to work so hard, which is a reasonable question.
I did try.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, it's because I'm ex-Met Office, I think.
This is it. You don't.
By them, then I would have been able to.
And
ex-employees are not given that privilege anymore.
Yeah, they take the keys off you, don't they?
Yeah.
And David Shepherd asks how easy it would be to build viaducts in flood risk areas and raise the line up above the flood area. Well, the answer is that we're doing a lot of that work now. So if you look at my Selby diversion thread on the Twitters from a while back, you can see that they built that line where it crosses the Wharf Valley. It's a huge long viaduct for precisely that reason. And actually at the moment we are retrospectively fitting viaducts or certainly flood bridges in lots of parts of the country where flooding is currently an issue where it didn't used to be. So where that 100 or 200 year flood or indeed the 1,000 year flood, which is substantial at this point, frankly, where we're modelling those flood levels, we're doing that work now. And indeed, people like Alex help inform the railway what that 100-year or 200-year flood threshold needs to be. Any other questions popping up now? Let's crack. Oh, go on. David Shearers is asking if it's true that the original railway builders were generally great at building structures but not so good at earthworks. Standards for new redoubled railways require far better retention. Oh, I can answer that one very quickly. Yes, David, it is. You just have to look at some of the, well, in fact, any of the earthworks on a lot of old railway lines. They've done pretty well, all things considered, but they really do. They're struggling, particularly. I mean, for example, the North Eastern Railway used to build everything out of just potash and just ash and any old rubbish they could get their hands on, and they'd rear tip it. Unlike nowadays, where we have to design these earthworks, the majority of earthworks are built, and I'm sure you knew this anyway, David. The majority of earthworks were built by just back tipping, driving a train along the temporary way and just dropping fill in, and then putting a bit of extra track on top of it, and then that would be fine. We don't have that advantage anymore. Right, I'll see if there are any. Okay, so we've got a few questions. Oh, you've got some more flood questions. To me and to you, Alex. Actually, is it British practice? Is British practice as ambivalent about building railway lines on river floodplains as they are in the US? And so, yeah, John Christoph is asking whether that we build all our railways in floodplains like they do in the US. Oh, yeah, I don't know, actually.
We don't build many railways, do we?
Yeah, anymore? We haven't. In the olden days, I think there was, as you pointed out, our boy Ransom seemed to suggest that actually a lot of local knowledge was used to avoid floodplains and flood areas.
At least earlier on, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. So nowadays we do a huge amount of flood modelling before we build anything. In fact, we do flood modelling when we're doing kind of major track realignments, let alone building new bits of railway. Right, okay, so we've got some questions about painting S&C, which we're going to save, because we are going to talk about hot things soon, but it's 20 past, and we're going to flick to the next slide. Unless you had anything else you wanted to add about these floody bits, Alex?
No, that's all to rail, I think.
We've nattered about these pictures of railways. I think that is the general theme of tonight. Not quite all these pictures of railways. Here's a nice image I wouldn't ask who it is, because we'll have to wait 45 seconds for the YouTube lag, but yeah, that's the Somerset Levels. And this picture somewhat shows what that... and we're talking about floodplains. Yes, this was built on a floodplain, because the whole of that part of Somerset is a floodplain.
Clues in the name, isn't it?
It is. The Somerset Levels, as in it's at the level of below sea level. Yeah.
So these parts meant that when I was training to be a weather forecaster at the Met Office College in Exeter, I was there during winter 2013 to 2014, which was one of the stormiest winters on record, which is as a theme that's going to start to emerge. Is a lot of things that have happened recently have been the worst on record, or the wettest on record, or the windiest on record, or the hottest on record. Very few coldest on records in there. Note, and there were you couldn't get out of Exeter by train for several weeks. I don't know the exact times of it or anything, but for most of the early part of 2014, all railway lines in every direction from Exeter, which is not that many, but I think there's 4, were all closed because they'd been washed away, either by the sea or by rivers. So, it was a very stormy period. And then in February 2020, we had another wettest period, which was even wetter than February 2014. So these things are going to start. They are already happening more frequently. And they're going to carry on getting more frequent, if you like.
I think frequenter is the correct English, actually, Alex. Yeah. Yep. I'm also going to drink some water because I'm going to die. It's really professional. We're drinking water at the same time and leaving the silence. So I'm going to say that to people in the chat. They're all hammering away. Oh, some people enjoying that. Lovely. Are there any railway lines on dams with the sea on both sides in the UK, similar to the Hindenburg Dam in Germany? Railways on dams. There are a few railways that are now on embankments that basically act like dams. I mean, a bit like the one in the shot, to be honest. The Barmouth... Yeah. No, not the Barmouth. What's the other side of Barmouth? The Somethingbourne. That railway is built on a bit of... actually built by Dutch engineers, because they drained that bit of land. And if there's a bit of drained land in the UK, invariably it was Dutch engineers that have done it. What's the name of the bit, Alex, south of... Why is that working like that? I'm just going to bring you up there. Sorry, my tech is playing up a bit. For some reason, Skype is having in a bit of a mood. Oh no, there you are moving. That's good. Sorry, technical issues, everyone. Don't worry. We'll get back to you on that one, Simon. Good question. I'll have a think. Alex is going to get Google Earth up, or Google Maps up as we speak. That's it. So the other side of Barmouth, there's a little narrow gauge railway that used to run out onto the Fairborn, that's it. That's the only one I can think. Oh, and in fact, the same thing happens on the connection of the Blenheim the Festiniog Railway as it approaches Porthmadog. That's also on a kind of a levee, I think, as well. Alex, if you recall that bit, you can probably get.
It has been there. Yes, it is.
Yes,
yeah. It's not got water on both sides unless something's gone wrong.
No, it's not got water on both sides, but I suppose it's a levee thing. Anyway.
No, sorry, I was looking at the wrong railway. There's the Festiniog Railway it's got the sea on one side and the river on the other.
That's it. So it sort of counts. It's not quite the same. Yeah. Generally, as engineers, we don't like to pile too many civil engineering concepts on top of each other. So building a railway, which is kind of fiddly as it is, on top of a dam, which is fiddly and problematic, is an issue. Yeah, sorry about the icons on Alex. For some reason, Skype normally just makes those go away, but at the moment, it's not doing that. It's leaving them up, which is... So that's fine. We can still see you, and they're only a minor inconvenience. No one minds. Everyone knows this is only vaguely and loosely held together production. So I don't think anyone will take great offence. Right, next picture. More flooding, but this time closer to you.
Flooding. We didn't discuss that much about February 2020 and February 2014, but most of that was weather, was stormy rainfall. That was rainfall associated with areas of low pressure coming in off the Atlantic, for example, and just successions of day in, day out of quite heavy rain. None of it necessarily particularly heavy, but just the sheer number of wet days building up and giving a huge amount of rainfall over, say, a period of days, weeks, or months, and then at some point the rivers overspill their banks, and then you've got flooding. But what we've got here is a ScotRail train just to the west of Edinburgh last summer, and this is a very common occurrence, and it's becoming more common, is very heavy downpours, mostly in the summer, so thunderstorm downpours. And these are often associated with what meteorologists like to call a Spanish plume, which is that's sort of a very typical mechanism to get heavy thundery rain and stuff in the UK. And basically, the reason it's called a Spanish plume is because you get an area of typically in the summer, the Iberian Peninsula is very hot, as I'm sure most of you, all of you are aware. But then you get a certain circulation of the air that means that hot air is brought northwards towards the UK. But it's not just the warm air that's brought northwards to the UK that's part of the problem. At the same time, you get moist air brought in from the west of the UK, and these two areas of air sort of mingle together, and basically you get moisture from the sea and energy, heat from the warm air, and that gives you enough atmospheric instability to trigger seriously heavy thunderstorms.
Okay.
And that's what happened in August 2019 in central Scotland, and we saw trains cancelled between Edinburgh and Glasgow. On all 5 lines were disrupted, and there's chaos, as you would expect.
Yeah. The Central Belt is probably one of the areas. Outside of London, it's the only part of the UK that works as a proper urban hub, and the reason for that is because it's got so many lines now, all electrified, connecting Edinburgh and Glasgow and the areas in between. But even that area, one of the most resilient sort of parts of the rail network, was blitzed by this kind of freak rainfall. Well, it wasn't freak, but just substantial rainfall event relentlessly. Yeah. And
these sorts of, so we're discussing about the fact that these are getting worse, but they're definitely not new, but they're becoming more common.
Yeah.
So if we look back to 1948, also in Scotland, southeastern Scotland, here we
go. I've got pictures. Yeah. We've got the pictures up.
The first part of August 1948, in the sort of East Lothian and Borders area. So that's, for those of you who don't know, it's out to the east of Edinburgh, and it's basically where the East Coast Main Line between Edinburgh and Newcastle runs, plus a lot of branch lines that are no longer there. But it wasn't just the East Coast Main Line that's affected. And between the first day of August and about a fortnight later, there was just a succession of thunderstorms with something like 3 or 4 months of rain fell in about 8 or 9 days. And that caused some flooding. But then on the last day of this sort of weather event, in 24 hours, there was 139 millimeters of rainfall recorded at some stations weather stations, not in East Lothian, and that's more rainfall than you'd expect in Edinburgh, for example, in the whole of the month of August and July added together in 24 hours. And these pictures show the results. So no matter how well you build your embankments or your drainage, you just cannot handle, or they could, in 1948 they certainly could not handle that amount of rainfall. So yeah, the washouts and heavy rainfall, downpours, thunderstorms, they're not a new thing at all, but they are becoming more common. And in fact, I don't know whether there'll be any washed out railways tomorrow, I doubt it, but we are looking at, there's a chance of some thunderstorms, for example, later this week, as this lovely hot weather that we've been having is moved away by some more unsettled weather from the Atlantic, and we'll see thunderstorms again, and it is already unusually hot for May.
Yeah.
So these sorts of things are, well, I'm not saying that there's going to be, 2 months of rainfall in a day or anything, but these sorts of rainfall events are definitely becoming more more common.
More prevalent, more common. I just ducked into my book behind because I realised that we're talking about the East Coast mainline. There's another good picture we're going to pop in a second, but in my PWI handbook, it's a bit old now, but I think this is a picture from this one here is a picture from the East Coast mainline, and it's more recent. I think it's from the late 70s, and it's another washout. And that was part of. There's another picture, I can't find it in here, of an earthwork that's been washed out that looks unbelievably similar to this, and it's in a similar part of the East Coast mainline. And in fact, there were washouts on the East Coast mainline quite recently that I think were in the news that don't look, not quite on this scale, but. Yeah, it has happened, but it's happening with, as you say, with increasing frequency, which makes my life as an engineer really hard, and it makes planners. Let's forget that. No chance I'm fitting that back in there anyway. Right. So, what's interesting with this is you got another picture, which should interest people. Which I'm going to click. Let's get presentation back up. So these two you can see. It's a familiar sight of rails hanging nicely with the sleepers hung underneath them even more nicely, except that the vertical alignment's done something funny because there's nothing underneath it. And so there's a nice picture here of them putting some stuff underneath it. Rather than reinstating the embankment, they've built a new bridge, which is it's a satisfying one. I can't quite see which of the A4 Pacifics that is.
Look at the original for you.
Yeah, go on for the nerds.
I don't know if it says.
We've got some good questions actually. While you're looking that up, I'm going to just flick through because we've got a good. In fact, David Shepherd, yes, is the answer, as you can see, which is precisely what they've done. David Shepherd asking, would it be better to replace that washed away embankment with a bridge? So let's have a look. So, okay, there was a good question earlier which I spotted. Simon Fisher asks, out of curiosity, when do the comprehensive weather records begin?
So it depends, A, where you're wanting your records for, and B, what weather type you're wanting them for. So I might have to look up the exact dates, but the Central England temperature record is the oldest temperature record in the world, and that's been built up. I think it goes back to the 17th century, and that's based on measurements taken in a sort of rough triangle that encompasses, if I remember correctly, something like Bristol, Birmingham, and Oxford. If that even is, it's a triangle. It's got 3 points. That's sort of the middle of England, basically.
Yeah.
And that goes back to, I think, 1659.
Oh wow! Okay.
It's still maintained by the Met Office.
He's googling now. But was this one of your exam questions when you became a weather person?
Yeah, I think it might have been actually.
Yeah. So that was a good question. Thanks, Simon. Alex is sort of. I mean, to be fair, you've answered that pretty well. To be fair, what was the date? Sorry.
Hang on.
Oh, it's fine. We'll talk amongst yourselves.
60 something.
60 something.
Temperature is relatively easy to measure. Other things don't go back as far, and so we've got lots of rainfall data back to the Victorian period. But actually, the comprehensive rainfall series that the Met Office used to make climate statistics and stuff, I think, only goes back to about 1910 currently. But it's a case of digitizing old paper records.
So I spotted that on Twitter. There was a massive digitization campaign for rainfall, which I think concluded. I think they managed it.
Yeah, it was. They've done ones before, but this one was like a lockdown one, and they released a load of paper records and got people to digitize them. And and they got vast amounts of work done in a few days that would have taken a couple of archivists years. So it's fantastic. Yeah. So rainfall not as long as temperature, but basically we've had reliable things like that for at least 100 years for most types of weather. Satellites, not so much, obviously, for obvious reasons. The first satellites were launched. The first weather satellites were launched in the late 70s or mid to late 70s. So we've got about 35 or 40 years of satellite records of things like ice caps and that sort of thing.
Yep. Right, so let's see. So Matt Reed's asking, are there not specific drainage pipes on or by a track, or is it just left to drain through the ballast? Yes, we do install track drainage on anywhere where, as much as we can. Obviously, it's an extra thing to maintain, so you have to be sensible where you propose it. But where you've got hollows in the track, so vertically, if you've got a hollow in the track, or if the track's sat in a cutting, So there, if the track's sat where my hands are in a cutting, then you need drainage to get the water out of there. And indeed, if it's on level ground, you need to generally, you might often have drainage to kind of get water clear. So yeah, we do design drainage specifically for railways. Right, your fan is going absolutely mental in my ears, Alex, but that's fine.
It's the same. It hasn't changed. It's the same.
It's just Skype. Skype's just not in a happy mood today. It's keeping the icons on your thing, not getting rid of them, and it's not your fault. It's just Skype being angry. Right, we're going to put a rather upsetting image now up of well, yeah. I think hopefully most people who are with us at the moment. We've got 60 people with us at the moment live. Hopefully most people are familiar with this image. And I'm sure Alex will say lots about it, but I'll just introduce. Obviously, this is a bridge collapse that happened in Wales. It was on the Heart of Wales line, right? Or was it on the? Yeah, it was the
line. Central Wales line.
It was Central Wales line. Sorry, it might well be the same thing. In any case, it's in Llanryd, and basically this changed the way that we do bridge inspections, but particularly bridge inspections and particularly scour assessments. So that's where water is scouring away at the piers that support the bridge. Totally changed the way we do that. This was sort of, for the structural engineers, the bridge engineers, this is one of their pivotal incidents, and it's changed the way that we it's changed the way that we do engineering quite substantially, thankfully for the better, but with kind of the tragedy. Look up the crash report on Railways Archive if you want to read about the tragedy that was this, or Google it, it's on Wikipedia. Anyway, so this, I mean, clearly water has had something to do with this. There's a field in the background that's wet. There's everything's wet, and there's what appeared to be maybe a smaller river now appears to be sort of a raging torrent. I was going to say, people in the chat are okay. The one that's stuck up in the air isn't the one you need to worry about. The one you need to worry about is the one that's totally submerged, and you can just about see a corner of it stuck above the water. So yeah, it was a two-carriage DMU on the Central Wales line, and that's the River Towie. Yeah. In Llanryd, as you said. So this was in October 1987, which weather-wise is a lot more famous for something else. Fish.
Fish. So Michael Fish doing his best ever forecast, which was technically correct because it wasn't a hurricane. Although the message given across did sort of encourage people to be a bit more blasé than they ought to have been, I think. So this was October 1987, and so obviously the wind across the south of England was the main feature, but with big windstorms, you often, or almost always, have significant amounts of rainfall too. So southwest Wales was hit by about 2 to 8 inches of rain on the 17th and the 18th of October. So that's, in proper modern units, 8 inches of rain is what? 200 millimetres or something, 150 to 200 millimetres of rain.
Yep.
We were discussing before, that sort of amount of rain is, you're looking in terms of how much rain normally falls in a month. Even for Wales, that's probably like a month's rain. I don't actually know what the exact amounts are for that part of the country, but it's a lot of rain. And that all just went into the rivers. There were lots of other impacts that were just sort of fairly usual impacts. Ballast being washed out and other lines being disrupted and flooded and stuff, but nothing quite as extreme as this. And what they found afterwards was that it was just the sheer amount of water, obviously the sheer amount of water going through the bridge, but it was actually scouring, like you said, Gareth, scouring under some of the piers. Only demolished one pier, but then when that collapsed, it sort of twisted the rest of the bridge, and took the whole thing with it. And that's sort of the effect. And then obviously once it was weakened and in the water, then it was. And the train ran onto it whilst before it had already collapsed when the train arrived. The train was running at 5 miles an hour.
It wasn't a high speed. This wasn't a high speed incident. It was dark, and they, in fact, you can read the report in great detail about what happened. But I think a lot of it was that it was pulled over. The first car, the DMU, went over, and it just pulled the whole lot round, and obviously very rapidly was submerged, and not nice for passengers. I mean, other people are pointing in relation to scour at bridge piers. Yes, a lot of people are referring to the up at, where was it? It was Lamington, north of Carlisle, where there's the failure, a similar problem which closed the West Coast Main Line for a long time. There was a scour, so this was a bridge being closed because of a flood event resulting in scour, but because we've improved our scour assessments, we're on top of it. Although there was a bit dubious because the scour assessments should have resulted in maintenance, not the railway getting closed because there was a problem. So that's another event that's happened more recently that's made people. It's a bit of a loss of corporate memory, as always happens when you disintegrate an industry. And as a result of that, they were a bit behind on the maintenance. Network Rail, perhaps, Network Rail. I'm dumping you in it. Network Rail haven't spent the money they needed to at that bridge, and as a result, the scour resulted in it being closed. Rather perhaps than a temporary speed limit, and it should have been fixed already. Essentially, is what had happened there. So another bit of a wake up call.
But had been an exceptionally wet period of weather, hadn't it?
Yeah, when was that? That was
late 2015, I think, or early 2016.
Yeah, it would.
It was
it was 15. Yeah, because it was like Christmas time, wasn't it, basically? It was like winter holiday time or something close to it. Was that right? Or was it Boxing Day or something? Anyway, this whole rail natter has been wild conjecture on dates, but don't worry about that too much. Right, next. Have you got anything more you want to say about this? I suppose the key point with this one, unless you've got anything else to add, is that this shows that weather has substantial consequences if we don't get it right, both from predicting the weather perspective and also from an asset management perspective. Like, you need to know what your structures are doing to make sure that they're ready to deal with whatever weather is going to happen. So they're doing the very best they can. We cannot have a railway when people say, "Oh, we spend too much on maintenance," or "Oh, we're building our railways to be bomb-proof." We're going forwards into the unknown world in terms of how much, what weather events are going to throw at the railway. So running a railway right at the knife edge of finances is a perfect way to kill more people by having a failure because a weather event has come along that you couldn't predict. So we need to be ahead of the game when it comes to maintenance, and indeed ahead of the game when it comes to how good we build how well we construct our earthworks, our structures, our drainage, and so on. Sober but a serious point. So spend more on railways, government. There we are. Alex, any last thoughts on flooding? I think we're moving on to the next one now.
No, right? I think we should move on. Yeah, move on.
So, landslips. Oh crikey, landslips. The thing in the background there is not a weather-related landslip, but I would recommend looking up the big slip that happened at Folkestone Warren during the First World War. Google that. I think I've done a thread on it. In fact, I've done a thread on everything. You know what I'm like. Anyway, landslips. So we're going to talk about landslips. Anything you want to say while the background is orange, Alex, or shall we move on to the pictures?
Yeah, so landslips, like you said, you sort of talked about triggers earlier on. Landslips are interesting because they can be caused over very short periods of time. So you can have a heck of a lot of rain falling in a short period of time that saturates the ground, causes a landslip, and then maybe derails a Class 66, taking stuff to Fort William, or something like that. Or you can have ones that are slower events that are reacting to sort of sodden ground over a period of months, or even, I guess, perhaps even years. If you had some bad drainage issues, you could have things being saturated, and even if that wasn't to do with extreme rain, you could have things seeping in and undermining your structures, and then or undermining your embankments or something, and then you've got a landslip. So yeah, they're not strictly weather, but they're, like you said, they're often caused by, or at least contributed to by, weather.
Yep. Before we move on, I've got an interesting question from David Shepherd, which is quite a good one, because so weather forecasters often talk about inches of rain. I think it's worth you explaining what that means, because it's not about everywhere having an inch of rain. So I'll let you explain what an inch of rain actually kind of means.
They say inches, they should say millimeters.
Yes, true.
So what that means is the amount of rainfall that is falling over a unit area, and with, let's just say, a meter squared. If you spread the rainfall that was if you put a square tray that was a meter squared, for example, it doesn't actually matter, out in your garden, for the duration of the rainfall that is being spoken about, the depth of the water would be the amount that the forecasters are saying. So 20 millimeters of rain will be 20 millimeters deep across your tray. It's handy though, because also certain European countries talk about kilograms per meter squared of rain, and that ends up being the same number. So 1 millimeter of rain is 1 kilogram per square meter.
Because
Inches
water, very conveniently, a ton of water is no, that's a terrible way. 1,000 kilograms, a ton of water is like a meter by a meter. So it makes the numbers nice and easy.
But the rainfall is extremely variable. Amounts of rainfall are extremely variable. So over a very short distance, you can have wild variations. Even if everywhere's got soaked and it's been rained on for the same amount of time, the actual amount of rain, if you could put tea trays out that were perfectly level and receiving this rain for the same amount of time over, say, a county or a city or something, you'll find that the variation will be quite significant. So when weather forecasters talk about amounts of rain in inches or millimeters, it's usually a sort of a medium amount for that area, which of course is exposing one of the flaws of weather forecasting, is that you can't be right for everywhere, and you have to decide, do I give the forecast that is going to be about right for as many people as possible? Most places will get 10 millimeters of rain, but what if one place gets 100? I mean, that's quite unusual, but it's not impossible at all. In that place that gets 100, we've been talking about events that have got 100 millimeters in and washed out embankments. So if that 100 millimeters of rain falls in somewhere that you don't want it to, even if your forecast for 10 millimeters for most people was completely valid, it exposes a real difficulty in communicating risk. And that's not unique to weather forecasting, but it is particularly public. People see that, and weather forecasters get a lot of stick for getting it wrong, myself included, and sometimes that's been very justified. But a lot of the time, it's more to do with how we're expressing risk and who for. But in short, millimeters of rain, put a tea tray out, and that's how deep your water will be.
Good explanation. Thanks very much indeed. And which David Shepherd has now pointed out an interesting observation, which is they've just thought about that water going into an embankment is extra kilograms inside, which increases the weight of the embankment. That isn't quite. And then you say providing extra lubrication in the soil. Yes, it's not necessarily, as you say, it's not the mass. Actually, it's what we call the pore water pressure within earthworks. It's about the lubricant, essentially the soil particles. As you increase the pore water pressure, you're reducing the friction between soil particles because they're getting further apart. And as you reduce those interactions between soil particles, you're reducing the shear strength, or a variety of different strength parameters. But one of them is the shear strength. So as those particles come apart, it means that the earthwork can support less stress through it. You might get a collapse. I could go on about earthworks for a long time, but we're going to get Claire Brint on at some point for a rail natter, and she is actually a route asset manager for earthworks for Network Rail. So she's who to listen to, not me. We're going to move on because it's 10:02 and we are probably not even halfway through. So we're going to hammer through the slides a bit. So here's a thing that's happened to a ScotRail 156, and it's in Glenfinnan, I think.
That's the Landslip, near Loch, so it's near Glenfinnan. Yeah, so this was January 2018. So Gareth sent me this picture, didn't you? And we were sort of thinking, had it been massively wet, and had it been, was it an unusual winter or season? Was it particularly stormy or something like that? No, is the answer. To be honest with you, so we looked. The couple of months preceding, November and December 2017, were both about average in that part of Scotland. January itself, so this was towards the end of January. January itself was also, in terms of precipitation, average. A little colder than average in terms of temperature, but in terms of rainfall, it was pretty, like I said, pretty average. But what that may have masked is the fact that you could get all that rain could have fallen in one day, or and could have been what caused this landslip. I don't actually know what caused it, apart from a lot of soil falling onto a train.
But the point is, you can see. I mean, you can see the water pouring down in the middle. It's a very good illustrative photograph of landslips and the fact that that water has appeared from the sky. So it shows that the fact that the rainfall and earthworks events, bad earthworks events, are intrinsically linked to each other. And as you say, yeah, in this instance, it might. I think in the report, the crash report, I think there was a massive spike in a localized, a sort of time localized spike in rainfall that meant that
I would suspect that. So late January 2018 was quite unsettled and quite cold and very snowy in the west of Scotland. So things like the M74 was closed with 30 to 40 centimetres of snow drifting across it, sort of about a week or two before this, and it had been a fairly cold month with plenty of snowfall. And obviously now we're looking at this photo later on in that month. There isn't very much snow apart from sort of above 700 meters or something on those mountains behind. So obviously that snow has melted.
Yeah.
So even if that snow fell over a long period and was about average for the average precipitation, if it all melts in one go, that has the same effect as very heavy rain. So it will have saturated the ground and perhaps done stuff to the pore pressure that you're talking about. This.
And again, temperature. Yeah, those rapid changes in temperature that result in a rapid melting. Presumably there is a likelihood that those again will increase in frequency. The likelihood of a rapid change in temperature increases in frequency with climate. Is that something that we're going to see more of as the climate continues to change?
Yes, I think so. We're going to see an increase in extremes, and extremes they're extreme because sometimes they're extreme because they're a prolonged period of something, but a lot of extremes are very sudden. And if we've got extremely or unusually warm weather over Europe, for example, and we're sitting in average weather in a winter with some snowfall, and then that warm air is able to be brought northwards towards us, then the temperature is going to go up by a lot, and that sort of thing is going to happen more frequently, I think. What Gareth and I were chatting about this a little bit before, and it's basically you've got to imagine a sort of a very spiky, not a sine curve, but a spiky graph that's going like that. So the points, the dips and the peaks and the troughs of that are your extremes. Your mean is something fairly bog standard in the middle.
Yep.
Climate change is the mean is not level anymore. Climate change is just tilting. Actually, I tilt it that way so people can see it. Climate change is tilting it. So the average is going up, and that means that the high extremes are getting higher, and the low extremes are also getting higher. Add to that the complicated mechanisms that mean that these extremes are becoming more frequent. And yes, so short answer to your question, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. We're gonna. So this is a great picture for making that point. But I think we can talk a little bit about. This is Eden Browse. Is that right on the Settle Carlisle line?
Yeah.
And yeah, again, this is a major bit of earthworks failure that happened. So previously, essentially, you had a cutting wall, even though that cutting was the side of a mountain. You had a cutting wall failure. Here you've got a mixture. You got both. So you got a cutting wall failure on one side of the railway, but chiefly this was an embankment failure down towards the River Eden, I presume. Eden Browse, yeah, down towards the River Eden. Yeah. And I think this picture shows. So this is the work. This is partway through the work to fix the problem, and you can see the scale of the collapse here. So in the previous picture, you've got they've actually lifted the rails here, but you can see that by the key clamp you can see by the key clamp fencing there, this is all bowed outwards, that there's been a fairly major slip and a big gap has appeared. So you can see the colour of the ballast just behind that wooden fence goes a bit darker. It's because basically a big gap, a crack has opened up where all the ballast's fallen in. And then you can see this picture, the scale of that failure, huge collapse of material. And there you can see they've had to totally rebuild. That's partly washout from the river. But again, the river. So you can see there's lots of things at play in earthworks. Partly you've got rainfall and desiccation in the summer, opening and closing the earthwork, and the earthwork sort of suffering, the health of the earthwork suffering. And if you've got extreme rainfall events, you might well have a river washing out the foot of the embankment as well. It's the whole sort of caboodle. So Alex, tell us what you know and found out about Eden Browse.
Well, I had a look at, so I don't know anything about the engineering of it, but I had a look at the preceding month's rainfall amounts, and I don't know if anybody remembers back. So this was February 2016 this happened, and November and December 2015 were exceptionally wet in northwest of England, particularly. Those were named storms. I think Storm Desmond was one of the big ones, and then there was Storm Frank as well, and then there was one that began with E in between that I don't know what it was called. So it was really, really, really wet. So it basically, so it wasn't heavy rainfall over a short period, which may have been what caused the Glenfinnan one previously, but it's heavy rainfall over 3 months, 3 really wet months in a row, and that's given enough lubrication to the earthwork, or decrease the pore pressure enough to have it all starting.
Yeah.
I don't know, did it go fast? Was it, or was it sort of a creepy one?
It was. I mean, earthwork failures are generally, most earthworks. Again, Claire would correct me on this horribly, but I think most earthworks failures are generally quite slow. So that it's not like a sudden dramatic slip of earth that happens all of a sudden. Although I think possibly the previous one was. But Eden Browse, generally when you see them, they're happening over the course of maybe. There's often the thing's already moving, so actually often there is already a failure that's happening, and the engineers know about it, and all they need to do, it's slow enough that all they need to do is drop a bit of extra ballast and just tamp the track up to the correct position. So they'll monitor that over time. There are loads. I mean, probably 60% of the earthworks in Britain are doing that. That's just how the world, soil settles over time. Again, I made 60% up. Don't shout at me, Claire. Sorry, but. So what happens is that often things that have already been moving very slowly or steadily, or maybe they haven't at all, the movement like this happened over the course of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 days of sudden movements of lots of centimetres all happening at once. And that, I mean, it doesn't matter for a train whether the movement's happening dramatically under the train or over several days in front of the train. The result is the same. It's not going to support it if it goes over the top. So this one, I think, happened over the course of 2 or 3 days. I think that there was this massive movement of material under the railway, and actually, what they did here was build a viaduct. So that's no longer technically, from a structural perspective, that's no longer an embankment. It is a viaduct with soil under it. So they put a massive raft. They buried a massive piled raft underneath to put the railway on top, because frankly the whole lot and the hill above is just going to continue. So actually what will happen is the soil above will continue to move underneath the railway towards the Eden, the River Eden underneath. Yeah, right, okay, I'm conscious of time. We've got 2 minutes to go. Everyone, I got told off for apologising for running over because people seem to enjoy it. We're running over again, sorry people. Right, where are we? Oh, in fact, stats.
Oh, right, yeah. There's some stats for winter 2016, and you can see that part of Cumbria had more than 170% of the average rainfall per winter.
And that's
so winter in this instance is December, January, February. So that actually doesn't include November 2015, which was also exceptionally wet. Yeah. And that
moisture is just not going anywhere. If you've got, you just
not in February. It's not. No.
Yeah.
Nothing drying it out.
170%, and that's not over 50. That's not a 50-year average. That's the 1981 to 2010, which is the standard. So when I was doing a lot of stuff for the Midland Main Electrification project, that sort of seems to be. I learnt this from looking at loads of these specific pictures. Actually, 1981 to 2010 is like the sort of standardized average that everyone uses to measure against, right?
30 years is deemed to be a long enough period by the World Meteorological Organization to look at climate rather than weather.
Okay, yeah.
And for some, well, I don't know when they actually started with these, these 30-year ones that always start with a year beginning with a 1 and then end with a 0.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was being a snow nerd at university, it was 1971 to 2000, and obviously it's since been updated. And after this year, we'll get a new one.
Oh yeah, that's true. Oh yeah, good point. We've got lots of people asking snow questions, but I've told them that we're going to save that for the next time you're on. We're going to have 30 pictures of snow plows, and that'll be the whole thing. And I'll also buy you a new mic for your birthday. So what else? So Waverley Wonder. I'm conscious of time, but no one cares. So Waverley Wonder, apart from you, Alex, okay, if you need to tap out, tell me, and we'll go on super quick. It's not going to take too much longer. We're not actually. It's not that much left. I don't think we're all right. Waverley Wonder asks, how much of this is due to poor drainage design or maintenance? In often cases, there is no viable drainage. Whether it's been installed or not, it might well have been forgotten. and lots of times drainage is just not funded. The drainage teams don't get enough funding. That's not necessarily so much the case anymore. I think there's a realisation that that drainage is incredibly important for our railway, which is why Ian Prosser, Her Majesty's Inspector of Railways, made a big point of Control Period 6, so the 5-year funding period from 2019 to 2024, being about renewals, and he was talking about structures and earthworks and drainage in a big way. So Network Rail's had the biggest funding settlement of its entire history. The railways are getting more spent on maintenance than ever they have, certainly in the last sort of 80 years or so, and that's focused on renewals, and a large part of that is earthworks and drainage. Now, thanks for bringing that map. That was good. I like that. I like seeing these because that's a very dark, spectacular, big patch of blue,
Yes,
which in this context looks bad. Right. Oh, the sea. We're going to get in the sea for this last section. Yeah, it is the last section, so we're doing all right time-wise. The sea. This is Saltcoats, isn't it? David Shearers is still on. This is one that he'll recognise. David Shearers is based is our Scottish representative. Although actually we have lots of Scots on, so yeah. So you're not alone, Alex. The sea. What do you want to say about the sea, Alex?
Well, the sea is very powerful, isn't it? And,
yeah, that's tonight's epiphany.
Yeah, it's very deep, and
and it's quite heavy.
Higher.
It's heavy.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
And it's rising. So basically, even if you don't believe that the ice caps are melting, hint they are. Even if you discount that completely, the simple thermal expansion of the oceans is going to account for quite a significant amount of sea level rise over the next few decades. So so if you think about the extremes that are at the peak, the highest level, the highest tides, or the biggest waves, they're just going to be a bit higher too. So everything that was built to protect railway lines from the sea, like this seawall at Saltcoats, is going to need to be taller as the sea level rises. The sea is a tricky one. Thankfully, I suppose there isn't that much railway line in the UK. I mean, there's obviously some very significant bits, but we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of miles of it that are exposed, are we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's there are only a few sections where the railway is, like, as you say, right against the sea. But actually, consider there are fair few, and all of them are problematic. Saltcoats is one. You can see the work that's gone on for the coastal defences here. The Cumbrian coastline, the Cumbrian coastline. On the west. Dawlish is the famous one. So what are we going to talk about next? Okay. So I just talked about the west, but actually the east. Tell us about the east.
So there isn't. I don't think there's necessarily so much railway line in the east that runs right by the sea, but there is this great big flat place called East Anglia, which, as I'm sure many of you have heard, in 1953 there was a very serious event, the East Coast flood. So these didn't just affect East Anglia; they affected the whole of the east coast of the UK, and even worse, affected the Netherlands, Belgium, and low-lying parts of northwestern Germany as well. I suppose it probably affected Denmark and other flat places up there too. And so this was a storm surge combined with very high spring tides and a really strong northerly gale. So what happened is what you need. Well, basically the North Sea is perfect for this sort of carnage. Under the right circumstances. So if you get a very strong northerly wind, that pushes the water from the big wide bit of the North Sea, sort of in between Scotland and Norway, and it moves southwards, and it gets narrower, and it also gets shallower as well. So basically you've got a great mass of water being pushed from the north, heading southwards, and then the sea gets shallower and narrower, so it gets the sea level rises. So that is partly what you call the storm surge.
Yep.
You also had very strong northerly gales. The East Anglia sticks out into so it's kind of, if you look north,
the big bulgy bit, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. If you look north from Wells next to the sea or Cromer or something, you're almost looking straight to the Arctic. I think maybe I should have to look at the map to check.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But I mean, there's nothing in the way.
Google out, everyone.
Yeah, you're looking straight up, and there's nothing there before you get to something far away in the Arctic. So there's a lot of exposure to northerly winds, and it's all very low lying. So in 1953, a few years after the war, Britain was still rebuilding, or Europe was still rebuilding a lot of backlog in maintenance and that sort of thing. And basically, this was a disaster that really came at a pretty bad time. Saturday, the 31st of January, is when it happened, and this storm developed out across the west, out to the west of Scotland, tracked across the north of Scotland, and then deepened. The area of low pressure became more severe, and then ran south eastwards into the North Sea. Another thing about storm surges is if you've got an area of low pressure, by the nature of it, you have areas of higher pressure either side, and if you've got the low pressure bit in the middle that's sitting right over the sea, the high pressure actually pushes down on the sea more than the low pressure, just because of basically gravity. If you've got low pressure, there's less air in your head. So the sea level can rise by a significant amount in the centre of a deep area of low pressure. Add to that the wind, northerly gales, and the shape of the North Sea getting shallower to the south and narrower to the south, and basically.
But wasn't there a particular tide? Didn't it coincide with
just disastrously happened on the high tide as well? Yeah.
Yeah. But it was like a spring. Wait a minute, was it spring or neap? Whichever one is the spring tide. It coincided.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously get high tides every 12 hours, but during spring tides, the highs are higher, and the lows are lower.
Because the moon's closer.
The moon's closer or something. I don't actually know.
Some physics or something. Yeah.
Something to do with, yeah. But it was bad. The combination of those factors and the fact that East Anglia is very flat meant that 145 miles of railway was flooded or cut off, and sadly over 300 people lost their lives in the UK. Many more than that lost their lives in the Netherlands and Belgium. Well, Belgium was about similarly affected as the UK, but the Netherlands had many people died there.
Catastrophic for the Netherlands,
And the other thing to remember is that there were no warnings. Nobody knew that anything was happening. The weather forecast was very basic. So they knew there were going to be gales, but there was no way of telling everyone. And then even once it started happening, because it worked its way down the east coast of the UK, so there was extraordinarily high tides in northeastern Scotland, causing damage, not to the railways as such, but causing damage and flooding and so on.
Yep.
And there were no mechanisms in place to telephone the Met Office and say, oh, by the way, the tide's 5 meters higher than usual, and we've got a northerly gale at 75 knots with 6 meter waves breaching our seawall. There was no way of them sending that southwards.
And even though I suppose people would have been listening to radio, there was pretty widespread radio listening at the time.
Was widespread, but it was very basic. There were only 2 or 3 channels, I think. There wasn't much going on.
And in terms of, but as you say, actually getting the communication to central, to the BBC, if you like, to send a communique out just wasn't. Yeah.
And then
it was at night time. A lot of it, of course, as well.
It was overnight. Yeah. And one thing that the railways were good for is they've got telegraph systems in place, or they did do. But those were all taken out as well across the area that was flooded. So even if they'd wanted to, and in a lot of cases they weren't able to communicate. And yeah, like I said, 145 miles of railway was flooded or cut off. I dare say that if the exact same thing happened today, there wouldn't be 145 miles of railway to flood, because a lot of them have been closed.
Yeah.
It was still a huge amount of network.
Oh wait, we've got a map. I can show people that. Here it is.
Map. Yeah. So that was sort of the area of the extent of the damage. So, and interesting is, we're talking about climate change. Could this sort of thing happen again? Aside from the fact that there are fewer railways there to flood, could this sort of flooding happen again? Well, it kind of did happen again.
Yeah.
In December 2013, there was a great big storm surge that was almost very, very similar circumstances to the one in 1953. An area of low pressure moving in from the northwest, running down the North Sea, coinciding with spring tides, northerly gales. All the recipe was there for real serious damage to happen. But partly because the sea defences had been built up so much since the 1953 flood, that really did, expose how exposed the coastline on the eastern side was. also there were great big warnings. I mean, I was working at the Met Office at the time, and there were discussions about the risk of it. 10 days in advance, and various the Environment Agency were aware of it. Over a week in advance.
And it was in the news a lot, so they were warming people
Yeah.
up to it. So it wasn't a surprise. So people had already got bags packed and things. Like there was
Exactly. I mean, you were there. I think hundreds or maybe even thousands of people were evacuated during this one in 2013, and homes were flooded and things. But it was nowhere near as bad, and crucially, nobody lost their lives.
Yeah.
Which is the thing. I mean, isn't it? So, could it happen again? Yes,
Yeah.
but thankfully we've taken steps to stop it being so bad.
But the step, I suppose, it's you're constantly you can never stand still because the Thames Barrier was fully active that during that event. I might be misremembering, but I think possibly didn't sea level actually get even higher than it was in 1953 on the recent one.
In some places it got higher.
Was it just locally dependent on all the pressure and all sorts of different things?
I think it actually was quite a bit higher. I think in places that weren't as badly affected in 1953. So I think the northeast of Scotland recorded some even higher tides.
Really? Okay, yeah.
You have an article open here somewhere that discusses it. But anyway, yeah, it was actually in some places it was worse than 1953 in terms of the size of the waves and the level of the sea. But the damage was much less. So
So it's a race against time because as we. The Thames Barrier was basically at full tilt, as it were, or the opposite of full tilt, whatever it is when it's acting as a dam against against the sea for London. That's now it won't manage that again if given climate change. And if we have that in another 50 years, it will not. We're looking at the solution to replace the Thames Barrier, for example, given that the sea level rise is at current trajectory going to be a lot. And so all the railways that are next to the coast are under substantial threat from this, from the sea causing problems. For example, this one here.
So yeah, I'm sure everyone will know where that is, won't they?
Yeah. For the people who are listening and aren't seeing, because I'm conscious that I do this dreadfully. And we have a lot of people we have some people who listen to this but don't watch it because it is on a podcast form. This is Dawlish. It's a nice curved bit of railway with some kind of traditional looking or sort of Victorian sea kind of coastal resort looking places and some quite summery looking kind of resort trees, and it's getting battered by two things: one, the colour grey, and two, the sea. And there's a lot of sea on places where it shouldn't be, like the railway that's running through the middle of it.
Yeah, so this was in during the winter of 2014. So this was one of the other reasons why I couldn't escape Exeter by rail. This was the westward direction was blocked by the sea doing its worst to Dawlish, which was at the time. I remember the media coverage. It was unprecedented. It was terrible, and it was really quite unusual. This severity of the sequence of storms. But a quick look in my book by Mr. Ranson says that this part of the railway was washed out in 1960, 1962, 1974, 1988, and 89, and at various times during the 90s.
Go on, hold up your bit of book. Hold up Ransom so we can see what he was saying there. I want to hold up the page. Show us the page within.
Right. Well, the cover is.
Oh yeah, that is. There you are. There's a HST and Swallow livery getting murked.
So it's not a new phenomenon basically at Dawlish. They built the railway line along next to the sea, and then the sea does what it likes essentially. But this incident in 2014 is just a flavour of what's to come more frequently, because this was just the sheer number of storms that came through was unprecedented. It was the stormiest winter in the UK,
and you can see what happened
by any metric you use. It was the stormiest winter pretty much.
Yeah, and so flick on to the next picture, and here we have we're getting to know this. So Earthworks, what they do is your horizontal alignment normally does all right, but it wrecks your vertical alignment. What a mess that is. I don't want that sagging vertical curve in my alignment. And also there's nothing underneath the track. So there's some nice G44 sleepers and some 56E1 rail by the looks of it. and some fast clip. Lovely new P-way, but it ain't got any ballast under it. And I can say, as a genuine bona fide senior permanent way design engineer, that's not good, and it won't make trains work over it. So yeah, that's a right old bloody mess, which is why they're totally rebuilding it. And it's not going to look quite as nice as it did, but the reality is that it's only a temporary solution, and the railway, even if, as the hope should be, and I know there's a group working on this and lots of people working on reinstating the northern route round the back via Oakhampton as the main corridor for the Great Western Main Line, or the kind of down towards Plymouth. Even then, you're still going to need this railway to run for the kind of suburban services, because actually it's quite a busy suburban commuting corridor, and so they're going to have to do hefty physical work there. So that's a bit of a mess, really, isn't it? And in fact, one of the houses has collapsed in the background too, although it's not in this picture.
There was a small matter of a house falling on it as well. Yeah,
not the best. So that's quite a lot to be done there. So
I mean, I actually walked along there a few weeks before this happened on a really nice day.
I
think there were about 3 nice days in the time I was living in Exeter, 6 months, and one of them, a few of us went down to Dawlish on the train and walked along to Teignmouth, and it was really nice. It was lovely. We had no idea what was going to happen in a few weeks. It was, even though we were weather forecasters, it was a lovely out.
Yeah, it's David Shearers has already pointed out, there are substantial current plans for Dawlish. I won't go into them in detail because, frankly, I don't know exactly what the total extent of the plans are. But there's a lot of money being spent, and it's only really a short-term solution. Network Rail acknowledge that it is only a short-term solution. Right, so that's Dawlish. We're not even finished. I forgot about heat waves. Oh God, heat waves. We're in one. Well, we're not in one. It's just a really hot day.
Yes, I mean, I think everyone will probably remember 2018, the heat wave. So we don't have any particularly exciting pictures of railway lines in heat waves, do we, Gareth? Because
actually, there are no good pictures of buckles.
Yeah.
I think we've got a picture of a temperature anomaly here, though.
Yeah, so this was 2018, and this was the mean maximum temperature anomaly. So, as you can see, over pretty much the whole of the UK, with a few small exceptions, it was at least 1.5 or 2 degrees warmer on average for the whole of the summer. And what does that actually mean on the ground? That means in the southeast of England, for example, where the densest collection of railways is, you're looking at the maximum temperature being the high 20s or low 30s most days for 3 months, which was pretty much what happened, right?
Yep.
And when you'll know more about this now, Gareth, but I remember doing weather forecasts for the Northern Irish Railways, and we used to have a little thing that would calculate the rail temperature.
Yeah.
So we would put in the air temperature, and then it would spit out a number that was the maximum rail temperature that would be achieved in direct sunlight. And if you'd start putting numbers like 33 Celsius as your maximum temperature, air temperature, the rails were getting up to sort of, I don't know what more.
Well, yeah, I remember you sending me emails about this because I was working on Midland Main Line at the time. I think it was quite early on in my railway career, so I was very much buried in Midland Main Line electrification. 20 degrees. You can expect the rail temperature to be about 20 degrees above air temperature, and that's not unusual. So if you've got 33 degrees air temperature, then you can expect some of your rails to be getting up to 53 degrees Celsius. That's hot. And bearing in mind that even the best P-way can start big, you start needing to put speeds on in the UK at 59 degrees for like brand new track. So G44 sleepers, well maintained ballast shoulders, all this stuff. 59 degrees is where you start needing to look at and put speed restrictions on and all this stuff. For knackered jointed track with rubbish falling to bits S&C. Like the approaches to Victoria Station, say, or Waterloo Station, where you've got lots of old junctions, but it's super hot because you're in the middle of London, so it's even got the microclimate of London on top of that. That's why you're closing railway lines. The temperature at which you're having to put 5 mile an hour speed restrictions on and watch people is 10 degrees below the expected rail temperature at that point. So Yeah, big problems. This is a big problem. And so if anyone wants to know about the rail buckling in more detail, I've written a medium, and I'll probably share it again this summer when it gets really hot. There's a Medium piece that I've shared that I can put a link to or if you just go to my Medium page, medium.com/Gareth Dennis, you can find that. And I describe what we do in the railways. I'm not going to do it now because time, and it's already 20 past. But yeah, rails. Here's a picture of a buckle. So kind of on that theme, Alex, here's some track, and this is what a track buckle actually looks like. It doesn't do the nice parabolic swing thing that you'll often see in kind of generic track, or that I use in my lectures. Track buckles normally look a bit more like this, where the track alignments just become completely pants. And if you've got a slow kind of freight or rural line, it's perhaps not a problem. If you've got 125 mile an hour main line, or if you've got some switches and crossings, S&C in amongst it, and those pop out of alignment, then that means you're going to derail trains. So that's why we don't like track buckles. Actually, you can see here that the ballast shoulder, there's some lighter grey ballast that's been dropped on here, but the ballast shoulder here is rubbish, and so it's not good. That track alignment's gone to hell because it's gone buckly, and that's so. As I say, if you've got a really complex track layout like this, so this is I think this is the Great Western main line looking out of Paddington, but you can see the amount of switches and crossings and intersecting track gets even worse where you've got complex track layouts, slips and things. Yeah, hot is bad, and there's not an easy answer to it. Slab track isn't the answer either, although it's potentially a way to help. There's just not an easy answer. In countries where they've got bigger extremes, they have to re-stress twice a year for winter and summer. We don't want to get there because that'll be, well, the government will fold. They'll just say close the railways before they let us do that. Anyway, sorry, I've talked a lot, Alex. Say more things that you can think about, or have we basically said everything about hotness?
We've said quite a lot about hotness, but the main thing is that this is going to happen more often, and the hot bits are going to be hotter. So, what we would consider a really unusual heat wave now is going to be, by 2050, is going to be a normal summer.
Yeah.
So, summer 2018. I mean, and I know a lot of people will be celebrating this because summer 2018 was great if you like going outdoors in sunshine.
Yes.
But if you're a farmer who wants to not have to irrigate their crops, or you're a rail engineer or anything else like that, or a health service that's concerned with old people, that sort of summer is a serious concern, and that's going to be normal in 20 or 30 years. Last summer wasn't quite so ridiculous in the UK in terms of unbroken sunshine for weeks on weeks, but we did have some extremely hot weather. Even though it was a bit shorter lived than the previous year, but I think last year the highest temperature ever recorded in the UK was recorded, and embarrassingly I can't actually remember what it was, but I think it was 38 point something somewhere in the southeast. The old one was 38.5, I think, and the new one was 38 point something, a bit higher than that. So I mean, rounding errors, it's about the same, right?
Yep.
But that previous record had stood for quite a long time. I think since 2006. So that had lasted nearly 15 years, or 13 or 14 years. And then it fell last year on the year after a very long hot summer. No idea what this summer's going to be like, but today we've already seen the temperature in the southeast of England get up to, I think the highest was 28 in Santon Down, and I think that's in Suffolk. And high 20s elsewhere, and it was 23 in Edinburgh. So that's pretty unusual. And at any time, it's not exactly common to get that in Edinburgh any time of year, but any time of the summer.
A really good visualizer, a really good visualizer of this is those wonderful graphics that are just pixel lines referring to each year and the temperature anomaly for each year. The stripes. Yeah. And it's just getting redder and redder. The frequency of those red stripes is just it's not like this is just it's just a random short, it's just a little flutter. No. There's a very clear trend towards this becoming the new, this is our new normal, is everything getting hotter. So in terms of from an engineering perspective, the first thing we can do is renew all of our old knackered switches and crossings, which is generally the weak point where buckling's a problem, but also funding our maintenance teams to be able to maintain track alignments, to go out tamp, to make sure everything's stressed properly, make sure we've got our stressing records up to date. Asset management yes, investment in and renewals are important, particularly around London where you've got lots of very complex track layouts. But asset management is the key thing, and it's the same for all the different sectors. It's not just rail; it's the same for all the different kind of infrastructures across the country. Managing your assets is really important. So here you can see this picture shows. I think it's the London Bridge approaches, and this is what new track work looks like. If you ignore the stupid third rail, sparkly, blow your foot off rail in amongst it, this is the future. It is modern, well-maintained S&C. You can see the alignment's much nicer. It's concrete sleepers, not concrete bearers, not timber bearers, which holds the track in place better. But without maintenance, this would end up looking like the previous photo. So you have to maintain it as well. So Toby Farman saying they stress rails in high temperature countries. We stress rails here. All of our rails that aren't jointed, we stress them. That means we cut them, pull them together, weld them, so there's a constant tensile stress in the rails, so that as they get hotter, it's not that you're increasing or up to 27 degrees Celsius, which is a stress-free temperature. Up to that point, you're not increasing the compressive stress, you're decreasing a tensile stress. But over 27 degrees, you're introducing a compressive stress. Now, where's a bit of water? Water, paper. Rails look like this. So the rails are very thin and very long. If you tensile, they deal with tensile forces very well. I'm pulling this apart, keeps its shape. The slightest bit of compressive force and it buckles, right? So managing rail temperatures is really important. Anyway, I'm not going to talk more about that because Alex is just going to fall asleep, which is, I've never put a guest to sleep before, but if it's going to be one, it'll be Alex. Oh, right, I put in a slide about wind, but we're not actually going to, I mean, all we can say about wind is, yes, wind is bad too for railways. But again, in terms of increasing frequency of wind, if we have more storm events because of climate change, I suppose that brings wind with it. But I think we chatted earlier and you said that there's still research into precisely what the impacts of climate change are in relation to wind more broadly. Alex?
Yes. So there's actually, in severe wind storms, there's not much trend detected. So in terms of rainfall, there's very much a clear trend, and temperature, obviously. But windstorms have always happened. We have had, things like the winter of 2013 to 2014, which washed away Dawlish, very stormy. Perhaps winters like that, perhaps windstorms will become, you get closer packed windstorms one after another, but perhaps the effect of each individual windstorm might not be any worse. So the compound effects might well be worse, but the windstorms on an individual basis might just be your same old common garden winter gale.
Yeah.
However, there's an awful lot of research going into that. I don't know really much about it at all in terms of what's going on, specifically looking at how that's going to be affected. But wind is bad for railways, and that's a fact. We know that.
Yeah, and this is a case where you've got some really rather flimsy OLE that's up there, some old Series 1, and a tree's fallen onto the OLE and made a right old mess of everything. This is why we don't like trees right next to the railway as well. Again, it's an asset management issue. Keeping trees, big trees, away from the railways it's good from a drainage and earthworks perspective, because trees suck up a lot of water. And then don't at other times of the year. So they actually change they desiccate and increase and they cause a lot of swell to earthworks. So trees are bad for that reason. They're also bad because they blow onto your OLE. Anyway, right. So we're horribly smashing the time record, but we're just going to finish with the forecast. So the forecast.
So disclaimer: I no longer have access to the Met Office big brain computer thing. So. This is just scratched straight off the internet that anyone can get. But obviously today the weather was lovely in the UK, at least, or most of the UK. Did hear on the radio that the Northern Isles were cold and damp, or at least damp today, which is unfortunately quite common up there. But anyway, everywhere else was lovely. But tomorrow, so there's a big area of low pressure out to the west. Low pressure is not great if you like sunshine, let's put it that way. But we've still got fair bit of high pressure over the European continent, and basically we're in between. So tomorrow's a bit of a transition day. We're transitioning from lovely high pressure sunshine to more unsettled low pressure, and then Friday that's happened. So the blue line, that's a cold front. We've had some frontal rainfall that's crossed the whole of the UK, And it's going to be windy as well on Friday. So if you look at the thin black lines that have got numbers on them, they're isobars, they're lines of equal pressure, equal atmospheric pressure. And basically, if they're closer together, that means that the pressure gradient is stronger, and therefore that means that the wind is stronger. So in a nice area of high pressure, like you can see on there, sort of out across the Baltic, the pressure lines are quite far apart. Light winds. Over to just the west of Ireland, for example, the lines are very close together. So we're actually going to see very windy conditions on Friday, particularly over the north and the west of the UK. Saturday, that low pressure is still in charge over sort of the north of the country, but high pressure is building back in a little bit over the southern side. So we're going to see, basically the further south and east you are, the better. Northern and western parts are going to be pretty windy with rain and showers coming in off the Atlantic, but it's not all doom and gloom for the weekend. So Friday, it looks pretty bad. Saturday, not so great if you're in the west. If you go on to Sunday, Gareth, so I've had to switch to a different weather provider here because the Met Office doesn't go beyond Saturday. So this is the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting's chart. And this is Sunday, so the high pressure is built a bit more. So basically, Devon and Cornwall, South Wales, Ireland, looking pretty good. Cloudier further north, and again, the wind's still quite breezy, and plenty of showers, particularly over western hills and coasts as well. But less windy over the south with that high pressure in place. And then finally, because it is a bank holiday weekend, or as we call them in Scotland, a public holiday. By Monday, so on Monday it's a public holiday, high pressure has built right back in. So that low pressure has sort of been banished. It's sort of headed off. It's zoomed off into the Norwegian Sea or something. Still quite a lot of low pressure out to the northwest, so out of shot across Iceland and Greenland and so on. But over the UK, a nice bit of high pressure. So winds dying down. Probably pretty warm again, and should be mostly dry on Monday. So Monday looks pretty good. But unsettled on Friday, unfortunately. So some wind, so maybe some trees will blow over onto railway lines. Hopefully not, but you never know.
And next on Rail Natter, Alan's deep bath. There we go. Thanks for doing the weather for us there, Alex. That was quite good. Everyone was really enjoying us dropping into like the weather mode there. I need to get you on for the weather after each one. I'll have to start employing you.
I'm pretty out of practice. Yeah, you can give me a pint a month or something.
Yeah, that's it. And you can do it once a month weather forecast. Yeah, that's it. Nice. Thanks so much, Alex. That's been great. I'm sorry I've hogged your time for half an hour more than I originally promised, but it's becoming the norm. I told you that an hour would disappear, right? I said that an hour would just absolutely evaporate, and it did. Thanks to everyone who's joined us again. This is another massive Rail Natter. People tell me off for apologising for it running over, but I feel like I should, since I theoretically say it's broadly an hour. An hour and a half is like a feature-length film. Oh, no, it's not anymore, is it? An hour and a half is like a long Netflix episode. Feature-length film's like 3 hours now. Anyway, as usual, this is available as a podcast, so thanks to all the podcast listeners on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and the other one I always forget the name of. Thanks to Giel, who always puts these together, puts them onto the podcasts. Next time we have Melanie Osborne joining us to talk about signalling, or rather getting trains from A to B without crashing into stuff or each other, which should be exciting for a lot of you, because a lot of people have been excited about signalling and wanted me to talk about signalling. I can't talk about signalling because I don't know anything about it, so we've got an expert to come in and talk about it. So Melanie's going to come and talk about that. Patreon, as ever. If you want to vote on or decide on future Rail Natter themes, that's where you need to go. Go to my Patreon and support me there. Laugh at P-Way being the way that my tier system works. And also you can throw me coffee and PayPal stuff as well if you fancy it. And that allows me to do more of these and buy better mics from me, but also buy better mics for Alex Priestley as well if he's going to appear in the future. Yeah, that is. So let's go back to side by side. So we can, just thanks very much indeed, Alex, for joining us. It's been a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. Yeah. That's all right. Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it.
Hopefully, you'll have me back for my so I can be a real snow nerd and we can talk about my favourite thing, which is snowplows.
Yeah, we're going to talk about snowplows and also that time those 2 times that we, or possibly more, but anyway, the 2 times where we avoided being caught in genuine snow rail disasters over the Highland Main Line, like particularly over Sloch. That's the laugh that we're. In fact, both times it was a Sloch related thing. It's just that the one of the times it was because gravity anyway threw a train at us at full speed from the top of Sloch. Anyway. Right, that's been Alex Priestley and me. We've had a rail natter. You've all been brilliant. That's been great. I'm going to just say cheerio, and all of you get to laugh when I find the button that is the what button I have to press to end this. But no, I found it. It's here. See, outro static /silent. Professional as ever. Thanks everyone. See you next time for rail natter. Bye.